Hey everybody, welcome back to Reliable Prepper. Today I want to talk about something that kind of flips the usual prepper script on its head. There are times when it might actually be smarter to tackle a massive crisis all by yourself instead of relying on a big group. Now, I know in most prepping circles we talk about banding together, pooling resources, and watching each other's backs. Honestly, that's usually the way to go, and for plenty of scenarios I'd recommend it in a heartbeat. But when the world really goes off the rails, when trust goes out the window and crowds start turning into these giant targets for violence or betrayal, sometimes the lone wolf strategy is the one that ends up keeping you alive when nothing else works. In this episode, I'm going to walk you through why, in some of the worst breakdowns, whether it's looting, riots, or messy factional fights, being on your own can be incredibly strategic. We're going to dive into the nuts and bolts of how you move around without drawing attention, how to gather supplies without becoming somebody's next target, how to stay healthy in both body and mind, and how to handle the fact that in a lot of these meltdown conditions, trusting a bigger group can actually paint a big target on your back. I'll show you exactly why going solo isn't as reckless as it sounds, what works best to keep you under the radar, and what mistakes can make the lone wolf approach collapse in on itself. Before we get rolling, if you're new here or just haven't subscribed yet, hitting that button is a quick and easy way to make sure you don't miss out on future insights. It also keeps this channel growing, which helps me bring you bigger and better content in the long run. We're all here to learn, adapt, and become more resilient, and I appreciate every bit of support you send my way. All right, let's jump into it. When people imagine meltdown scenarios, cities ablaze, folks breaking into stores, entire blocks turned into battle zones, the first instinct is often to find a group, pool what you have, and tough it out together. In many situations, that's still a good move, if you can trust the people around you, if there's still some local law enforcement, or if the electricity and internet are partially intact, group synergy can be a lifesaver. But sometimes the chaos escalates to a point where trust is this super rare commodity, and suspicion rules the day. That's when big groups turn from an asset into a liability. You see it in real accounts of civil wars or major breakdowns in different parts of the world. Large gatherings become magnets for conflict. Rival factions assume you've got food and weapons, so they come knocking to take it. It's easier to intimidate or subdue a group in a siege than track down scattered individuals. Or even if you're not physically attacked, infiltration becomes a massive threat. Someone might pretend to join you only to figure out where you stash your supplies and then vanish with them, or tip off a gang. When trust evaporates, it's easier to travel light and lean rather than lug around a team that might crumble from within. Another key piece here is your own ability to pivot quickly when danger strikes. If you're by yourself, you can make a snap decision, duck around a corner, or melt into the crowd. If you see armed looters heading your way, you can just slip out the back. In a group, you might have someone who panics or who insists on standing their ground. Or you might have a debate that eats up precious seconds while the threat closes in. That window of reaction time can be the difference between leaving unscathed and stumbling into a life-threatening showdown. And we can't downplay how group stress wears on everybody. People get scared, angry, or even greedy in high-pressure circumstances. Fights over leadership or resource distribution can tear a group apart internally. Meanwhile, a lone wolf only has to stay disciplined about their own moral code and survival plan. There's no risk of a trusted friend making a rash decision that gets you cornered. Granted, you do have to handle loneliness, but some people actually handle stress better when they're fully in control of their movements and decisions. In any major collapse, especially one fueled by lawlessness and looting, the ability to go unseen is massive. It's not just about wearing camo or sneaking around like some movie character, it's about your total presence in the environment. Are you carrying a huge pack that screams, "I have valuable supplies"? Are you traveling in a bunch of vehicles that draw attention from a block away? Are you making a racket when you move? All those factors can determine whether opportunistic criminals or desperate folks see you as a juicy target or pass you by without noticing. It's often better to wear clothing that blends in, something that looks ragged or ordinary. If you're covered head to toe in the latest tactical gear, you might look cool, but you also look like you might be armed and carrying good stuff. That's the exact opposite of what you want in a scenario where most people's moral compasses have gone haywire. You want to fly under the radar, and that often means looking unremarkable. A small, neutral-colored backpack can hold your essentials without immediately announcing you as a prepared individual with gear worth stealing. The same goes for noise. If you're with a group, someone might be coughing loudly, muttering complaints, or banging gear around. Alone, you can keep your voice down, walk softly, and be mindful of clinking metal. You can train yourself to set a bag down gently instead of letting it thump. In tense environments, something as small as a dropped water bottle can be the difference between remaining hidden and drawing in a bunch of looters or a patrol. That's where being a solo operator really shines, because you only have your own noise discipline to manage, rather than corralling a group of fidgety people. And let's talk about how you handle your living space. When you're on your own, you might sleep in a tiny corner of a damaged building, set up near the edge, and keep your footprint almost invisible. That means less trash, less smell from cooking, less sound from conversation. A large group in the same space can't help but leave a trail. Footprints, litter, fires, loud chatter, and so on. It's practically broadcasting a signal that says, "We're here and we might have supplies." The quieter, leaner presence of a single person can be a lifesaver. Meltdowns don't necessarily happen in one place. They can sprawl across entire neighborhoods, sometimes entire cities, with certain areas flaring up with conflict while others lie temporarily calm. The roving nature of these threats means you have to be prepared to move at a moment's notice. If you see a riot forming down the street, or a column of smoke that suggests something's on fire nearby, you should be able to decide instantly to shift directions. You won't have time to consult or rally other people because by then, the threat might be at your doorstep. Stealth, in this sense, doesn't just mean sneaking around corners with your heart pounding. It also means knowing how to pick your time and place. If you need to scavenge supplies from a certain store, you might monitor it for a while, see when the mobs clear out, then make your move quickly. You don't want to get there at the exact same time as a swarm of looters, because that's when things get violent. Arriving earlier might mean you're the first to get confronted by an armed security guard or a group of territorial looters. But going later, when the chaos has subsided, can let you pick over what's left in relative peace. Rural environments might feel safer, but they come with their own hazards, like armed locals defending back roads or gangs controlling choke points where highways intersect. Being alone, you can consider routes that a big group can't handle. Maybe there's a rough trail through the woods or a narrow bridge that vehicles can't cross. Or maybe you can slip by in the dark where a bigger group would need flashlights or headlights. The advantage of one person is being able to pivot seamlessly without the logistics of managing multiple people's stamina, opinions, or readiness. Your mobility also ties back to having fewer possessions weighing you down. You won't need to cart huge amounts of food or water if it's just for you. That's not to say you shouldn't have backups. You definitely should, but you can spread them out in caches, travel light, and adapt on the fly. If you're running away from a confrontation or a sudden crisis, you'll be faster with a single backpack than a vehicle convoy full of anxious people or heavy gear. The biggest challenge in any collapse is always going to be supplies, whether it's food, water, or crucial medicines. Groups can pool resources, but they also consume them faster and have to go on large supply runs more often. Those big runs become prime opportunities for attackers to ambush or follow you home. If you're solo, you can minimize those trips by scavenging more carefully and rationing your food. One example is water. A large group needs gallons upon gallons daily, which might force them to fight over a well or line up at a makeshift distribution center. Both situations are high risk in a lawless scenario. A single person can refill a few bottles from a smaller water source, even from the back tanks of a toilet in an abandoned building, so long as you purify it properly. You can even gather some from rooftop puddles or small streams. It might not be appetizing, but with a decent filter and purification tablets, it'll do the job. You move on, leaving hardly any trace that you were there, and nobody's likely to track you down over a few bottles of water. Fuel is another commodity that gets scarce fast, but a single traveler might only need small amounts, maybe for a single motorcycle or generator, if you have a more permanent hideout. That reduces your risk at gas stations, which often turn into battlegrounds in a collapse. People fight over the pumps, or gangs move in to control the supply. If you only need small amounts, you can siphon from abandoned vehicles in areas where the big looters already left. It's not guaranteed, but it's more feasible than needing a giant fuel stockpile for an entire convoy. Medical supplies are critical. Groups have more injuries to deal with, which means a larger med stash. That stash can become a coveted prize for desperate people. By yourself, you only need enough for your personal needs. A small kit with antibiotics if you can find them, bandages, painkillers, and so on. You still have to be extremely cautious about injuries, because there won't be anyone to nurse you. But at least you won't be walking around with a giant crate of medical supplies that every bandit would love to snatch. The challenge is ensuring you do enough self-care to avoid injuries in the first place, because no one's coming to bail you out. Meltdown scenarios sometimes feature more than just random looters. You'll see organized or semi-organized groups form up. Things like local militias, gangs that expand their turf, or even leftover government forces if they haven't completely dissolved. These groups can be extremely territorial. They might set up checkpoints, demand tolls, or press people into forced labor. If you're part of a large group, it can be hard to slip through their areas unnoticed. Maybe they see you as a threat, or maybe they just want your supplies. Either way, confrontation looms. If you're on your own, you can pose as just another displaced soul traveling through. You might get a sympathetic ear or at least not trigger full-blown aggression. You can negotiate a tiny bribe or slip away entirely. In a bigger group, some members might look threatening, or the group might have a reputation that precedes them. Suddenly, that checkpoint feels threatened and tensions escalate fast. As a lone person, you're often seen as a smaller risk or a smaller potential reward. Of course, some groups are just outright hostile to everyone, so the best plan is to avoid them entirely. You watch for signs of their presence. Spray-painted symbols, guards posted at certain intersections, or random gunfire. Then you find another path, or you hole up until they pass by. In a group, you might have a few hot-headed individuals who think they can handle a fight. That can draw you into a deadly skirmish. Alone, you're more likely to say, "Nope," and quietly disappear before they even know you exist. Infiltration, betrayal, and sabotage are also huge problems in meltdown groups. A single traveler has no infiltration threat. Nobody can embed themselves in your non-existent group. You might need to watch who you trade or interact with, but at least there's no risk of a friend sneaking off with your gear when you turn your back. That can be a giant relief in times when paranoia runs high. Trust is scarce, so it's sometimes simpler not to rely on it at all. Being on your own can be physically taxing, because you have zero backup if you twist an ankle or get into trouble. You can't hand off guard duty to someone else while you sleep, so you have to pick hideouts carefully and stay extra alert. But that also means you adapt your methods to be safer, move slower, and take fewer unnecessary risks. It might seem limiting, but it forces a kind of discipline that can keep you alive. Hygiene is often ignored in meltdown scenarios, but it can literally save your life. Disease spreads when people are packed together in unsanitary conditions, especially if trash is piling up, sewers are backing up, or there's no consistent waste management. Being solo means you can keep your immediate area much cleaner, and you can decide who you come into contact with. If you do encounter a large group living in squalor, you can say, "No thanks," and pass on by, reducing your exposure to any outbreak. The same goes for your water sources. You're the only one drinking from them, so you can manage them more carefully. The mental side is tricky, because isolation gets heavy. In a meltdown, stress is constant, and not having anyone to share that weight can wear you down. That said, sometimes having a group that's fractious or untrustworthy can be an even bigger mental load. Self-reliance can become empowering if you keep your morale up. Something as simple as setting a small daily goal, maybe reorganize your pack or find enough water for 2 days, can give you a sense of accomplishment. A journal, even if it's just scribbles on scraps of paper, can help you process what's happening. Maintaining this inner resilience can be your secret weapon, especially if meltdown conditions drag on for weeks or months. You should also try to keep your body in decent shape, because you never know when a sudden sprint, climb, or scramble might be needed. Even simple routines like stretching in the morning or doing a few bodyweight exercises can make a big difference. Injuries are dangerous when you're on your own, so maintain enough fitness to handle the stresses of constant movement. At the same time, pace yourself. Burnout is real, and if you're exhausted, you make mistakes. It's a delicate balance you'll have to strike every single day. A meltdown that lasts more than a few days often fractures cities or regions into little pockets of control. One area might be run by a local militia claiming they're the new protectors. Another area might be claimed by a street gang. Some pockets might have vigilantes or neighbors who banded together to keep outsiders away. If you're traveling through these patchworks, a big group is a rolling beacon. People see you coming, and they either prepare to fight or plan to extort you. One person can slip in between these lines if they plan carefully. The biggest tool you have here is intelligence gathering. Listen for rumors, keep your eyes peeled for graffiti or flags that indicate territory, and maybe do a bit of reconnaissance from a rooftop or a safe vantage point. That's hard to do with a group. People get restless, or they start to bicker. Alone, you can take your time. Watch patterns of movement, see how often patrols pass by, and then thread the needle to avoid them. It sounds paranoid, but in meltdown conditions, paranoia can save your life. You should also consider how you present yourself if questioned. Maybe it's best to look like you have nothing. You can hide any valuables, keep your weapon out of sight, and appear harmless so whoever you meet decides it's not worth the trouble to rob you. If you do have to bribe a faction, a single traveler can get away with handing over a smaller portion of supplies than a whole group would. People assume a group has more, so they demand more. You still need to watch your back, though. If they see you as too easy a target, they might decide to take everything. That's why the ability to read a situation is crucial. You might act a little more confident if you sense they're more opportunistic than outright hostile. If you see there's no negotiating, you don't have to consult with a team. You just disappear, slip away, or find an alternative route entirely. That's the level of flexibility being alone offers, and it can be the difference between a lethal confrontation and a quiet escape. Many swear by the bug-in strategy, barricade your home, stock it up, and wait. That's fine for certain disasters. But in a scenario with rampant looting and violent unrest that's not contained, your home can turn into a huge liability if people think you have valuable goods. The entire neighborhood might be under siege by roaming gangs or desperate citizens. While a group can defend a home, a single person usually can't mount a strong defense without turning the place into a fortress, and that's going to draw attention. The alternative is being mobile or picking temporary spots that nobody would guess are inhabited. Half-burned structures or partially flooded buildings can be overlooked by looters who assume there's nothing inside. You can hunker down just long enough to rest, eat, and plan your next move. Keep your area clean and quiet, and be prepared to leave in a hurry if something changes. The beauty of being solo is that packing up and moving can take you just a few minutes, whereas a group needs time to gather everyone and everything. Stashing supplies around is a strategy that can pay off big if you do it right. Maybe you seal some food and water in weatherproof containers and hide them in places off the main routes. Then, if your main bag gets stolen or you have to run for your life without it, you have a fallback. In meltdown conditions, losing your gear can be a death sentence, so having multiple caches spread out can save you. Of course, you have to be discreet when creating these caches. If someone follows you or sees you hiding goods, they might help themselves later. You can also think vertically. In urban zones, rooftops are often overlooked. If you have a quiet way onto a roof and the building is stable, that might be an ideal overnight camp. You can see a long distance, giving you early warning if trouble comes near. Most looters go for the ground-level entrances, rarely checking upper floors in detail unless they suspect a big reward. It's not foolproof, but it's often safer than ground-level spaces that can be stumbled upon by anyone wandering by. When you're alone, you want to avoid confrontations as much as possible. That doesn't mean you can't or shouldn't be armed. It just means that every fight you get into carries an enormous risk. Even if you win, you could get injured and have no one to help you recover. Or you might run out of ammo, giving your next enemy a much easier time. Sometimes the best weapon is the ability to vanish before anyone even knows you're there. Situational awareness becomes your constant companion. You keep your head on a swivel, scanning for potential threats, always thinking about an escape route. At the same time, you don't want to look jumpy or paranoid. There's a balance. You want to move with confidence, but not arrogance, alert but not terrified. That way, you don't come across as an easy target, nor do you provoke someone who might see you as challenging. If an attack is unavoidable, having a concealed firearm or a well-chosen blade could save your life. But remember that meltdown scenarios can be full of groups that are better armed. If they see you as a threat, it might escalate faster than you can handle. On your own, you can't rely on a friend to cover your flank, so picking your battles is crucial. You might end up in a situation where you bluff or talk your way out, maybe handing over a small item to placate a robber while keeping your main valuables hidden. A group might resist or argue, which can turn a robbery into a bloodbath. Sometimes you'll hear people say that carrying a weapon makes you a target. That can be true if you're openly displaying it. Concealment changes the equation. If trouble finds you, you at least have a fighting chance. But if no one knows you have it, you're less likely to provoke someone looking for guns. The art of deception and unpredictability is a major advantage for the lone wolf, who doesn't want every passerby to realize they're armed. When chaos reigns, when looting and unrest turn streets into battlegrounds, and trust is about as rare as clean water, going solo can be the one tactic that keeps you out of the line of fire and away from the dangerous politics of group dynamics. It isn't a path for everyone, and it definitely requires a steady head, a well-honed set of skills, and the resolve to face day after day of stress without the support of a reliable team. But for those meltdown scenarios where big crowds act more like bullseyes than bulwarks, operating alone can offer stealth, agility, and an uncanny ability to slip through cracks that would swallow bigger groups whole. I hope this exploration gave you some insight into the advantages of the lone wolf approach. If you're enjoying the content here, subscribing really helps me out, and also ensures you'll keep getting tips, strategies, and stories that can help you be more prepared for whatever life throws at us. Join the conversation in the comments. Share any experiences or thoughts you have on the solo versus group debate. Together, we're building a community of critical thinkers who understand that preparedness isn't one size fits all. Thanks for hanging out with me. In a meltdown world, sometimes trusting yourself alone is the strongest choice you can make. Stay safe, stay sharp, and never stop improving your skills. That's how you thrive when the chips are down. And remember, even in the toughest moments, your adaptability and willpower can see you through. If you keep your wits about you and plan methodically, there's a clear path forward despite the chaos. A lone wolf might walk that path alone, but the journey can still lead to survival when everything else is falling apart.